Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 10th of August 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we will be joined by Graham Downing. I'll just say it's absolutely pouring down outside, so presumably the amber alert for temperatures has disappeared. We did have drought, but now we're going to get flooding.
Summer's back.
Yeah. Be fearful. Whatever the weather is, be afraid.
Okay, well, we're going to start off with this bombing in Yemen. BBC reporting that this morning, amongst many, many others. Saudi airstrike kills 29 children in Yemen. So this is a bus carrying children in northern Yemen, attacked yesterday, hit by an airstrike from the Saudi-led coalition. It killed 29 children, amongst others, and injured many, many more. The comments from the people on the ground was that following an attack, this was a comment from the Red Cross, said following an attack, an International Committee of the Red Cross hospital has received dozens of dead and wounded. Under international humanitarian law, civilians must be protected during conflict. Scores killed, even more injured, most under the age of 10. And that was from the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross. What did the Saudis have to say about this? Well, they said today's attack in Saida was a legitimate military operation. It conformed to international and humanitarian laws. I'm not quite sure how they work that out. But we should just remember, of course, that as the Wall Street Journal reported just a few weeks ago, in June, I think, that the United States military is providing Saudi and other Gulf allies with intelligence to fine-tune their list of airstrike targets in Yemen. So there you go. Is this the result of the UK's, what the Wall Street Journal calls, the US's deepening role in the Yemen fight, offering Gulf allies airstrike target assistance? Good job, United States, if that's the case.
Well, we go from war to war, Mike, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Libya, or into Syria, or through into Yemen. The continual policy, mainly led by UK and the US, is war. And we can see certainly the British government does not care what happens on the ground as long as this agenda goes. My question would be, whose foreign policy are we really enacting here? Is this coming directly from the British government, or is this part of a wider Israeli policy? And I'm not afraid to ask that question. I think many more people need to ask it as we see the growing influence inside the UK government. Well, against the back of that, and of course we have many refugees coming into Britain amongst other immigrants, what do we see happening now? We see angst ramping up, and I was very interested in this Mail Online report. Muslim mother 20 says she was left humiliated when bus driver told her to remove her veil because he didn't know what she was capable of if he couldn't see her face. Now my question over this is, what are we actually dealing with here? Are we dealing with a bus driver who's oversensitive, or are we dealing with an issue? Many people could say it's not right to be wearing the niqab, the type of veil where you can't see the lady's face. But in the background, of course, we've got massive terror training going on to anybody who's providing a public service. So this terror training, the so-called prevent strategy, is being driven into schools. It's certainly there, of course, in the police, but anybody who's working on public transport is having the terror aspect rammed into them. So could it be this driver is just oversensitive, or is he actually reacting like this because he's been reframed in some form of terror training? I'm going to leave our audience to think about that. But if you want to find out more about the type of veil that the lady was wearing, then you can go and visit the BBC's news round. So the BBC making sure that our youngsters are informed here. I'm just going to add here that it's very strange that this custom was not considered a problem when Westminster welcomed in adherence of wearing the hijab or the niqab or the burqa, and there's some other types of veils listed there kindly by the BBC. But this was not a problem at all when the government decided, well, we're going to have all these people into the country. They're welcomed into Britain. Once they're in, then it's a problem. And I have to say, with increasing cynicism as we look at British government policy, that you can just see that we've now got the ideal opportunity for the government to ramp up the fear and the angst. Any woman who dares to wear the burqa or a veil is a potential terrorist. Is this government policy to create this danger and angst? I think it is. We'll leave you to think about that.
Okay, summer holidays approaching, and we just want to let everybody know that UK column will be closed. There'll be no UK column news during the period beginning 16th of August, which is next Thursday, and the 3rd of September, which is the first Monday of the first week of September. So no UK column news during that time. We hope to have a refreshing holiday, and we'll see you back in September, but a few more days to go before then. Now, let's invite Graham Downing to the programme. Welcome to the programme, Graham.
Hi, Mike, Brian, good to be back.
Now, you wanted to highlight this book, and really we want to talk about HPV today, but tell us about the age of autism.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm getting a little bit of feedback, guys, just to let you know. I didn't actually send that link in. I think that's an error somewhere. However, the actual book is a very good book. Autism isn't my particular area, but The Age of Autism is a collective of well-motivated parents and intellectuals that challenge vaccines. JP Handley is one of those editors, is involved with the Age of Autism collaboration, as it were. And before I get into this and preface this, the actual is a bit like a Poirot murder mystery. It's a little bit convoluted, so I'm going to try and do it in a minute or so before we look at some of these slides. Is that there's a group allegedly of independent researchers and scientists called the Collaboration Collective, if you like, or group. And recently, one team within that group, they're all around the world, these guys, these researchers and MDs, one team published a study promoting the HPV vaccine, saying it was great. It works really, really well. It's relatively safe. Few problems. You know what, down the line, we can deal with that, but it's great. On the back of that, big promotion about vaccinating boys, and eventually the government says, right, we need to vaccinate all boys with the HPV vaccine. Subsequently, it was revealed that during this study that Mr. Gates had donated $1.15 million to this organization. Now, I'm not saying that influenced it or not. I'm just saying that people raised a suspicion over that. So park that to the side. Now we find out that the actual study that did come out, that was also promoted in the British Medical Journal very heavily to its doctors, is biased. In fact, only looked at half of the studies. And because of that, massively underreported the harms of this vaccine. We now find out that a separate group in this collaboration collective from the Nordic Centre, they're called the Nordic Centre, Peter Gertsch is the head of that, they also submitted a paper just before this Provax paper to the British Medical Journal saying, look, here's a collection of all the data, kind of index of all the studies around HPV. And you need to have this to ensure that anyone who does research is not cherry picking data. Okay, so you can compare it to this and say, here's all the studies. The British Medical Journal, where it's reported, refused to publish that just prior to this other study coming out. So now people are very deeply suspicious. So you've got the British Medical Journal not publishing one type of study, but publishing another one that is very pro-vax. Cut a long story short, the government says bring in the vaccine for all the boys. These studies are all saying it's great. Now we find out the second group, the kind of group that's challenging this first group, is saying, eventually did get a paper published in the British Medical Journal, heavily criticising the pro-HPV vaccine, but it was kind of parked to the side in one of their kind of associate journals, if you like. And they didn't make a feature of it. They didn't publish it in their main journal and say, you know what, there's a problem with this vaccine now, we need to look at this. They didn't do any of that. Okay, so leave that to the side. Go forward a few weeks. Two articles come out, one by, I think, Dr. David Healy and one by Jonathan Stone from Age of Autism. And they heavily point this out and heavily criticize these journals for saying there's something wrong here, because studies which are very pro-vax are getting highlighted and published, and others that either in the first instance are not getting published or not getting featured. And therefore, they point this out, and lo and behold, now suddenly the British Medical Journal publishes a study and publishes some information. Oh, there's a problem now. There's going to be an urgent look into these matters. So that's the preface before we get into the slides.
Okay. So we've got the Trusted Independent Drug Vaccine Research Group receiving $1.15 million donation from Bill Gates.
Right.
Then one team from Cochrane publishes a favourable review of HPV vaccine. Then a separate team, also in the Cochrane group, has previously sent a paper to the BMJ strongly criticising the first team's review, and the BMJ refuses to publish it. The second team tries with a different paper, and that does get published, and the paper strongly criticises the first team's review for cherry-picking biased information and leaving out 50% of the relevant research. And now we're into some of the detail of this. So what have we got here, Graham?
Well, this is another paper. This is some of the research that was probably left out. This is another paper that from last year that showed there's some serious problems with this vaccine. And just to sum it up, without going into massive detail, you can just see from the left there, for every one girl that allegedly benefits from this vaccine, and I say allegedly because we still can't prove that it cures cancer or prevents cancer, I don't believe, 13 girls are reported in this paper to be injured. And they're talking about serious events. And if you read the list of serious events there, it includes death, life-threatening events, hospitalization. However, none of that has really been put forward and made available to the GPs, the nurses, and the doctors. And this is what the other paper, in a sense, is how it's criticized. Say, look, you can't, you've got to look at all the data.
Okay, and then we're moving on to the Alliance for Human Research Protection.
Yes, this was another organization that criticized as well. And what they said, they actually, I'm giving you information across the web, people are picking up on this now. And they were just saying, look, they're putting the blame firmly at Bill Gates, saying that the money has come in and it's influenced these researchers to do this. I can't guarantee that, and I'm not saying that, they are. And, and they're saying, as you can see, the authors claim we judge most included trials to be at low risk of bias. This is what these pro-vaccine paper is saying. And they're saying that's an oxymoronic statement, because they're saying all but one of the studies was done by the vaccine manufacturers. And we now know that study that allegedly wasn't done by the vaccine manufacturers, in fact, was connected to a vaccine manufacturer. So it's a heavily biased and industry favorable paper, and doesn't look as though it's a fair paper, to give it the most diplomatic kind of critique.
And here we have another one. The Cochrane HPV vaccine review was incomplete and ignored important evidence of bias.
Sure. And this is the actual paper that's criticizing it. And this is by the second Cochrane group, if you like, the Nordic Center. It says it very clearly. If you can read it for yourself, there it's pretty clear. Is that the Cochrane? These were the findings that the Cochrane human papillomavirus vaccine review missed nearly half of the eligible trials. Now, understand this: it missed half of the eligible trials, but that's the paper that was promoted in the British Medical Journal, and that's the paper that was used as a key paper to bring in HPV vaccination for boys. And it was influenced by reporting bias and biased trial designs. So the designs are set up in a way that you're kind of going to get the answer you want, that the vaccine allegedly is good. And it says, and it's very, very diplomatic, it's saying, look, it should make more effort to identify all trials and the trials' limitations. Now, also keying this is Gardasil 9 was shown to be more dangerous than the Gardasil 4. Now, Gardasil 9 is the one that's coming in now in the schools in the UK and across the world. And that was not even included in this alleged comprehensive review that was used and published by the British Medical Journal to its doctors. So that wasn't even included in that review. So it shows you on so many levels, this really does look dodgy, quite frankly. And John Stone from the Age of Autism said, this is one of the most blatant suppressions of the news in modern medicine. The fate comes in not reporting. The fact of not talking about this, not promoting this to the doctor, only promoting the stuff that makes the vaccine look good, which we now know is a flawed paper that's done that.
Okay, and this is a further paper, yes?
Okay, let me just see.
It says
Okay,
if 100%
okay, got
of
it.
females in
These
this
ones,
study... Sorry.
these ones. If you remember from last time, we had an issue with the sky, but we put these together. There was a couple of papers there that people need to be aware of. And in one study, the top study there, the authors published this. Yet again, this hasn't been told by your GP or your consultant or your nurse or your school teacher. And it says, and their conclusion from this study on this vaccine was that if 100% of females in their study had actually received this vaccine, the data suggests that the number of women having ever conceived would have fallen by 2 million. So there's a significant fertility issue with this vaccine that's been highlighted in that paper. And another paper underneath was also highlighting the fact that they think it might actually be increasing cervical cancer. And once again, your GP has not been told about this. As far as I understand, the British Medical Journal hasn't promoted this to its members, to the people reading the British Medical Association or British doctors or any other doctor that would read it around the world. So you're looking at bias in how the literature is first researched and how they research the literature, and it's bias in how the medical publications are presenting the literature that's available.
Right. Okay. And if we move on, then this is from the British Medical Journal, opening up data at the European Medicines Agency, and you've headlined this this slide "Fraud."
Well, okay. So, and you've also got a little clip. Excuse me. I think, Mike, from the NHS Dying for Health conference as well, if you get a chance to play it, where I actually mentioned this. But this other group, this group that's criticising the pro-vax paper, the kind of Nordic Centre, which is also part of Cochrane itself, a separate group. This doctor here has, this is another one of their papers, and what he's saying is that when studies are done for a drug company, for a vaccine company, if they don't get the right result, otherwise it doesn't say that their drug's any good, what they can do is they can hide that negative data. It goes to in this case, it goes to the European Medicines Agency, and they put it under lock and key, and no one gets to see it. And this can go on and on and on until they eventually can get their data to show that their drug or their vaccine looks good. And then that's the one that gets published, and that's the one that doctors see. Now, that is an awful practice. It should not be going on. And in this particular paper, they're pointing out that they looked at a particular drug, and it actually took them 3 years to get the true information. 3 years of contacting the European Medicines Agency. The people are supposed to be looking after us. They eventually got this information released, and they calculated that because they didn't have this information and doctors didn't have it, that 50,000 patients had died, probably as a result of not having this information. That's the level of fraud, in my opinion. It's incredible.
We have seen occasionally articles like this, but the headline here is "School Nurses Intimidating and Pressurizing Young Girls to Get the HPV Vaccine Jab, even resorting to bullying tactics."
Well, this is, if anyone's got any kids in school, certainly of a certain age, you're going to know this goes on. There's a lot of pressure to get this jab. And there's also something called the Gillick competency. And if the person administering the vaccine thinks that your child, irrespective of what you believe, can assess the benefits and the risk of the vaccine, they can actually get consent from the child without your permission, which people aren't aware of, which is absolutely horrendous. And if you think for a minute, Mike, what I've just shown you, okay, these people here administering these drugs don't even know what I've told you. Okay, they're not aware that one of the main papers being used to promote this has now been found to be heavily biased and only looked at half the data. They're also not aware of the first paper I showed you, which showed you the ratio of serious harms to alleged benefit. And these people allegedly are trying to get informed consent. Well, how can they get informed consent when they themselves don't even know the full facts about this vaccine?
Graham, I'd just like to broaden the conversation out a little bit if we can, because a few days ago I got an email from somebody who had written to complain about the way we had covered the climate change issue, and actually they were critical of the way we'd done it, but had missed the point that actually what we had been doing was criticising the way the mainstream media had covered the climate change debate. But if we take climate change as an example and vaccines as another example, it seems to me that what's going on at the moment is that science as a whole is becoming extremely unscientific in the way that it's behaving, in the sense that it's demonizing dissenting voices. It's becoming ideological in a way that really we haven't seen since the Dark Ages, perhaps. And anybody that is dissenting or is criticizing the evidence from pressure groups is being effectively thrown out of the scientific community, and this seems to be absolutely anti-scientific to me. What are your thoughts on where science and medicine is going at the moment?
Well, in terms of you're absolutely right. In terms of the medical literature, there are the two retiring leading editors of leading medical journals on retirement both said you pretty much can't trust what comes into our journals. And now they can say it because they've left the journals. Professor Ioannidis, the world's leading expert in medical research, heads up a huge team that analyzes all the papers published. He's of the opinion, and very few would dare challenge him, that 90% of the data that's published is unreliable. And what we've got now, we've got pharmaceutical-driven, almost like a cult-driven industry. And you're absolutely right. And you could do a whole program on what's happened to anyone who's dared to get up and speak about it. They have their license taken. They're humiliated. They're attacked. The Nordic Centre in itself, the senior physicians there have been attacked as well in terms of every time they try to criticize these things. You're up against a huge industry that has that funds teams of people to their job is to deal with anyone who stands up. Their job is to highlight these people and then to start to systematically remove them, because obviously you're talking about a huge profit here, and there are many there are many sides to this. AstroTurfing is one side of it, where journals and fake. You can have fake journals. You can have biased data. You can have all this sort of stuff being published, which builds the groundwork to promote using a vaccine. And then you get people are paid to email important people or to write comments on blogs, on newspapers. And all of this is a coordinated, concerted effort in order to bring about an alleged groundswell to bring in a vaccine, for example, or a drug. This has been well documented and is well understood. And in this case here with the British Medical Journal and the Cochrane Group, it appears that people are highly suspicious of this, because it's either an incredible group of coincidences, excuse me, or there's some foul play going on here.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Graham, thank you very much for taking us through that. I particularly pick up on your comment that it's often by omission of putting information across that the media or some of these journals are distorting the truth. We're going to come on to that theme a little bit more in just a moment. But let's bring up the advert for the talk in Totnes tomorrow. You are attending. Can you tell us a bit about what you're going to be talking about?
Okay, so this is put on by Jason Leosatos in Totnes. I'm going to be speaking. I think Mark Stewart is going to be speaking. I believe you're going to be speaking as well, Brian. And I'm going to be covering the biological effects of 5G. I'm going to be covering what it does to your body, in particular what it does to the mitochondria, which is the energy producing factories of your cells, of your body, without which you would simply wouldn't live. And I'm going to show you hardcore evidence what this technology is going to do. And I say it now, and I say it every time I speak about this. What shocked me about this is with normal 4G or whatever, you've got half a chance. You can kind of avoid it, unplug it, move away. But with 5G, the way they're talking about rolling this out is you aren't really going to be able to escape this. And when you see the actual effects of this on the human body, then you're going to become extremely worried, as I did when I looked at the literature.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just for our viewers and listeners, that talk, Totnes, tomorrow starting at 6 o'clock until 9, and that's in the Civic Hall, which is located in the centre of Totnes in, well, not so sunny Devon.
Not today, anyway. Stay with us, Graham, if you can. Now, let's move on to opium. Well, this is the the Special Investigator General for Afghanistan Reconstruction in the United States. And they've published a report. This is a few days old now, and we missed it at the time, but I thought it was worthwhile just going through a little bit of what they were saying. They were talking about opium production in Afghanistan and saying that US and British countermeasures against opium production have failed to reduce opium crops and have also contributed to increased poppy cultivation. Because the West is funding irrigation projects and so on. I just thought I'd remind everybody what the situation is with opium production at the moment. The relevant UN authority said this just a few weeks ago. Opium production worldwide has reached highest ever recorded by UNODC. And the UNODC published the World Drug Report, I think, in June this year. And as we can see there, on the right-hand side, opium production, particularly from Afghanistan, has been the main supplier of opium around the world since 2002, and 360,000 hectares of cultivation in 2017. So, well, the last time we looked at this in detail, we pointed out, this was from the Afghanistan Opium Survey 2016, that between 2015 and 2016, poppy crop eradication fell by 91%. When we move forward a year to the 2017 report, eradication is still down by 81%. It's an improving picture. So the headlines at the time said, eradication up 101% since 2016. Well, in fact, it's still significantly down from levels of 2015. But even at that, these levels are not hugely significant. So let's just put a graph on screen which shows the amount of land being used for opium production against the amount of eradication that there has been in the last year. And we see 360,000 hectares of production and 750 hectares of eradication. This is the maximum effort that they can produce for eradication of opium poppies. Now, why are we surprised, or why should we be surprised that this is going on, or perhaps why shouldn't we be? This is a quote from an Afghani opium farmer reported some time ago. Opium is money. Why should we waste time growing wheat? That's absolutely true. For them, it's true. And, I'll just remind everybody that when Britain was active in Helmand province, the British military was distributing leaflets telling local farmers, no problem, you want to grow opium, we're not going to stop you. And the results continue to show that there is no sign of Western-backed forces doing anything to eradicate. I have to say, just that report that we mentioned at the beginning of this section pointed out that the US had spent $8.62 billion on trying to prevent opium production in Afghanistan. I'm sorry, Brian, I do not accept that figure, or at least I accepted the figure that the money was spent.
That was Brian, that was over so many years, wasn't it?
Well, that was 2002 to 2017, but even so, even if that's, how much money does it cost to, burn a field of opium?
Well, the answer to that is that we know that troops in Afghanistan were told not to touch fields of opium. So lots of questions to be asked on that.
My point is that $8.62 billion has been spent. What has it been spent on? Because it doesn't. If they're only eradicating 750 hectares a year, that's pretty expensive use of money.
Eradication.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's come on to the BBC. Always a good source of propaganda, but I think something even more dangerous is on its way. We came across this video advert almost, but the headline with it is, "Can you speed read these news stories?" Let's just have a look at what they were talking about.
BBC is experimenting with speed reading technologies which could help people read the news faster than ever before. If you managed to get all that, then congratulations, you just read the news faster than most people. But where might something like this be useful? Perhaps in a smartwatch. So here's the current BBC News Watch app. As you can see, the text is very small and you don't get very much information. So could you get across a story faster using this method? Let's take a look on another watch. This shows you one word at a time. You focus on the red letter in the middle and relax your eyes, and that helps you read much faster. So let's try a full screen version. Give it a go. So I'm with Cyrus now. You've been behind this project. Tell us, what is the science behind it?
Well, in the traditional way of reading, you're moving your eyes from left to right across the screen, and that takes up quite a lot of time. By presenting one word at a time on the screen, your eyes can relax and not spend that time moving across.
A smartwatch screen is quite small. Are people really going to want to read the news on a little screen like that, even using this method?
Well, it's very hard to say. I mean, people are spending more time reading that on smartphones and watches, which are much smaller than traditional books or magazines. It's very, very different to the way that people are used to reading, so it's very hard to say when or if this will ever take off.
And we have got one more example. This one is, I think, 3 times faster than human reading. So give this one a go, see if you can do it.
Well, there we are. Graham, I'm going to ask for your opinion on this, but when I watched this video, I found it amazingly concerning what was going on here, because to me, this was pumping the news straight into people, subliminal, the focusing on that red letter and then the flashing message. This is information, in my opinion, which is going to go straight into the mind. And the second thing that goes with this, of course, you've now reduced a news story to simply a burst of a few letters, a couple of sentences. So where's the research? Where's the analysis? Where's the evidence? Effectively, you're going to have a watch on your wrist pumping the BBC's biased opinion straight into your mind. Is that a bit excessive?
No, it's not excessive, because first of all, don't have a smartwatch on your wrist. If there's any Wi-Fi involved in that, then you increase your risk of having cancer. So that's point one before you even get into what it's doing. The second thing is, it's a bit of a gimmick, because apart from the fact that it's making you look at this news, is you aren't critically appraising it, and you haven't got a chance to skip back and have a little look and then compare and have a little think about it. The other thing is you're not going to comprehend it properly, so your comprehension goes down. There's lots of technical reasons why, when you read, the body does certain things. It sub-vocalizes, and people will say, well, in other words, you kind of say the words as you're reading them. And actually, it's at a level where you don't actually recognize it, and they've done studies on this. And people say, oh, we get past that in order to improve your speed. They don't. There's many studies that are disproving and debunking that claim. So you will lose comprehension. And so you're going to be fixated on something. You're not going to comprehend it, and you're going to kind of be forced to read it if you can't move your eye off that line. And you've also got the Wi-Fi aspects as well. And there's been many claims. I think there's one claim. There was a famous guy who could read allegedly 10,000 words a minute, but he was missing part of his brain that connected the left and the right hemispheres. And also JFK allegedly could read, I think it was 12 to 1,800 words a minute. It's another load of nonsense. The average person is 200 to 300 words a minute. And really, as you start to push it up, you lose comprehension. And just even reading on a screen is not how the body reads. The body doesn't read visually. It has to use touch. So touching paper is also part of the process of reading. And you comprehend text more if you read from a book than if you do just off of a screen. So what you're going to do is you're going to dumb people down.
Okay, well, if you follow that advert through for the BBC, let it run to the end, the next thing you find is the BBC effectively advertising the watches to put this sort of thing across. So we needn't dwell on this for too long, but what is this? It's actually an advert, and there were 3 watches featured. But to my mind, the BBC looking at this kind of applied psychology now in order to get their message even deeper into people's minds.
Well, I was just simply going to ask, why is the BBC doing this? What is this the BBC's responsibility to run this type of experiment on people, or is it the BBC's responsibility to produce news programmes?
Well, we know what their responsibility should be, Mike. It should be the truth. We'll come on to that in a second. But the BBC much bigger on propaganda and how to get that into people's minds. So one person we're not going to see coming across on the BBC's Digital Watch news broadcast is Melanie Shaw. I'm just going to remind people about these really excellent postcards that we have, which put her message across, her plight across so well. If you haven't got any of these, and it is so powerful to write a reasonable and measured comment on these cards and get them circulating to people in order to put pressure on them to take action. If we had thousands of people doing this, it would be a truly powerful campaign. Now, I'm just going to add that we know that a large number of people are at the moment doing an awful lot of good things to try and help Melanie in her predicament. But we're also aware at the moment of certain people who have suddenly started asking for very large sums of money in order to fund a new legal team for Melanie Shaw. And I'm going to state that we have grave concerns about this because Melanie, from the outset, has never asked for money to help fund her legal team. And one of the points that we all have to respect is that Melanie has chosen certain aspects of certain individuals within her legal team, and she has very, very good reason for doing that. I'm not obliged or not able really to share all of that personal detail via the UK Column News, but I can tell our audience that Melanie has been very astute with who she has stayed with respect to legal teams. So we have two issues going on. We have people who are trying to collect money on her behalf. This is not sanctioned by Melanie and is not something that the UK Column supports at this moment. And the other thing is that we've got many people, we've got one or two individuals who are trying to really write to Melanie and tell her that she needs to be changing her legal team. This is not good either. Now, we don't know whether people are doing this because they're enthusiastic to help or misguided, or there's something else happening. But we have to respect what Melanie would want herself. And certainly on the question of money, she has never, since the very first day she came to see UK Column, asked for financial help for legal matters. We'll probably have to cover this in a bit more detail next week. But let's move on with the BBC. And this was just a little article, was it something or nothing? So it was the BBC with a video, a little video documentary, Why Pussy Riot Crashed the World Cup Final. Now, I was intrigued by this. I decided to watch it and see what the BBC was doing. But in case people are not aware, if you simply have a quick search on the internet, you can find the types of thing that Pussy Riot have been up to. And it's pretty unpleasant, particularly if you happen to be a Christian or a member of the Russian Orthodox Church, where they've carried out some of their work. Now, the BBC comes in at a very different angle because this is a very smooth, carefully calculated video in which they are clearly putting across a very positive image of the Pussy Riot fraction and how nasty it is of the Russian authorities to treat them in this way. In fact, if you sum up the video, what the BBC is doing is trying to give this Pussy Riot members support that they actually have been victimized. It's very terrible that these people have come under pressure by the Russian state, despite the fact that they've desecrated churches. They've come out some really vile publicity, and now we've got another event which has just taken place. So we've taken some screenshots here, but one of the things they're very big on is that they illustrate how Russian law enforcement often enters the lives of ordinary Russians. They break down doors, they come and take people away. And as I listened to it, Mike, I thought how remarkable, because this is exactly the type of behaviour we are receiving on a daily, weekly basis about certain elements within the British police, doors being broken, vulnerable women being forced to the floor by up to 10 officers, children taken, property taken, people that have been beaten up, no action by the police. The BBC can't cover that, but the BBC can produce a documentary video to support Pussy Riot, who are claiming that they're victims of the Russian state. This I found particularly insidious because they asked them, how were you able to get into the stadium? And they calmly said, well, we got hold of police uniforms and we spent time teaching ourselves how to behave as the police. And then the clip here, of course, is labelled, it's because of the police uniform, it has a magic, mesmerising power. And here they were sniggering and boasting that having impersonated Russian police, they were able to get in to cover out the act. So the BBC actively encouraging criminal activity in another country. So this was the overall thing. What I noticed is nobody wanted to claim having produced it. So it was a completely anonymous article. And this, of course, is very common now by the BBC. We're told by the BBC that because the BBC has produced a piece of news or a journalistic article, we can believe it because it's been produced by them.
Yeah, it should be enough for you.
It should be enough, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, as often happens, you get little coincidences. And I did a little bit of work and I came up with the website of this lady, Krista Satori. And here she was advertising this clip. Now, I'm having a little bit of a guess here, but usually the BBC journalists are very keen to promote their own work. So I wondered whether this lady might have been connected. And I went and had a look at her website, which her Twitter page, which is very interesting. And what I noticed down here is that she's boasting that part of her job as a BBC journo is to watch the watches op in Russia. Now, I think that's an abbreviation for opposition. I'm pretty confident that that's what it is. And then I noticed her pinned tweet and I was just astonished. This is what she said. We're not in the business of producing toothpaste or tyres at the BBC. Our business is truth. We can't operate without the truth. If we aren't prepared to look at ourselves honestly, how can we be trusted to look at anything else in our reporting honestly? Thank you. And then I was quite interested to see that she'd effectively copied in this lady at BBC Carry. But before we get to BBC Carry, let's have a look at the sort of thing this lady does. Well, it was pretty easy to see her tweeting out about Putin. Recent poll shows Putin foreign policy supported by only 18% of Russians. That was a very interesting statement. It was particularly interesting if you have a look at the comments where people were pulling that claim apart. It's not that dramatic. People were asked to pick one or more answers to the question, why do you like Vladimir Putin? That only 16% chose I like his foreign policy compared to 22% 2 years ago does not show Russians want him, does show that Russians want him to focus on domestic, but not that 84% oppose. So astute people are beginning to pick up the BBC twisting information in order to get the BBC's anti-Russian agenda across. And a second one says this is how deliberate mistranslations are used to manufacture wishful thinking and distort analysis. The actual question was, what do you find appealing about Putin? Respondents could name more than one from a list of answers ranked in descending order. So there's a slightly different angle coming in there. And we really want to know what this woman is doing.
But the bottom line there is that, of course, she was upholding the truth in that statement.
I think not, Mike, but yeah, I take where you're coming from. And Graham, this proves your point because the BBC twisting the truth. But this is anti-Russian. If you look at what this is doing, she's working with the opposition in Russia. She's anti-Putin. And into my mind came good old Julia Harkin, former BBC Media Action Project Manager, who was boasting of working with the opposition in Syria to achieve regime change. So BBC despicable propaganda, but increasingly easy to catch them out. And if you're curious, here's at BBC Carrie. This was the lady who got very, very excited that her male colleagues were earning a vastly bigger amount than the women were being paid. So the girls didn't campaign to have the men's pay reduced. Of course, what the BBC women wanted was the same grossly inflated pay packets as their male colleagues.
Well, I mean, if you're going to manipulate statistics in that way, you've got to be well paid for it, don't you?
I think you have, Mike. Graham, we'll give you a bit of comment on that, but the BBC, of course, certainly not going to tell the truth over vaccines, and we're getting a classic demonstration of how good they are at distorting the truth.
Oh, you see this time and time again. I've listened to interviews on BBC Radio where people have got up and tried to give a different opinion. And the whole slant of the interview, as with all these things in geopolitics, the military thing, the EU, it's like they're reading off the same song sheet. They absolutely trash the people. They'll get their expert on. What they're even talking about now is talking about non-equivalence. I think that's the term, where you aren't even allowed to speak anymore because you're not in the right group. You're not a medical physician that agrees with vaccines, or a PhD who agrees with vaccines. If you don't agree with them, you're not allowed to speak because you're simply not qualified anymore. And this is very, very dangerous. And this is, of course, Orwellian and all the other hackneyed phrases that can be used. But the sad thing is this is our reality in 2018, where we're all trying to get to the truth and trying to speak the truth, and the organisations that we all should look up to and permeate our very lives are avoiding that and preventing us from doing so. And it's an absolute and utterly disgraceful situation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Graham. Well, we just end by saying, if you've never seen the article on UK Column website, From Magic to Madness, the government's NLP assault on our minds, where we have warned, and we are still warning, about the fact that the government's propaganda campaign here in the United Kingdom includes the use of applied psychology, behavioural psychology, and neuro-linguistic programming. We'll end there. Dr. Graham Downing, thank you for joining us. Having trouble with my words today, Mike, but it'll improve over the weekend. We'll be back on Monday, and we will give more detail on the Melanie Shaw case. And I'll also say, if Simon Sideways is listening in today, we'll also have a look at your report on the Melanie case. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back Monday, same time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.